Okay, you were just telling me about Paul Ruddy's script for Hogan's Hero, right? Is that who it was?
No,
It wasn't Paul,
I'd hired someone else to do the script.
but his was the original.
Yeah.
Okay.
The point was that our script had been rewritten, and it was a better script, and they made the pilot. It was also a Bing Crosby production, and CBS did it, and it became a great success. And as a matter of fact, it's still running. I think 30 years later, it's still going.
Yeah, that was in 1965 that show.
Well,
Yeah.
more than 30 years. Amazing.
Were you involved in the casting of that show?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Ethel Wynant was the head of casting at CBS, and she and I together cast it.
Two unique female executives.
That's
I mean,
right. That's right.
Describe Ethel for me.
Well, Ethel is a marvelous woman at her job and a wonderful woman in herself. She's very knowledgeable. She's very good at what she does. She's very fair, very creative, and very talented. I like her a lot.
Now, some of the people that you cast in that show with her, Bob Crane.
Oh, Bob Crane, she and I did that together at CBS. We had a videotape of Bob Crane that it was a test, and we ran it. Ethel and I were in the main video room of CBS, and we put it into all the offices. They all have television sets, and we played the test for everybody in the executive group at CBS at the same time, at the same moment, and we waited to hear from them.
How soon did you hear after?
Oh, immediately.
That's great. Some of the others, Werner Klemp, I don't know.
Werner Klemperer.
Klemperer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about him?
Well, he was very good at what he did, and we felt, that he would be right for the role, and he was successful at it. They all were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had John Banner, Robert Clary.
Robert Clary, yes.
Richard Dawson.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure we got all those. Who were some of the writers for that show? Do you remember who you hired?
No, I don't remember. I remember I hired the producer, Ed Feldman, and I wasn't as involved in the writing of it as it started, as I had been in the pilot.
Mm-hmm. When the show finally aired, what did you do throughout this? Because it ran for 6 years on television.
Yeah, yes, it did, and it's 30 years later. It's in reruns. Well, it was just it was very easy to sell, and it was a success right away, which is why it went for that long. It never was low in the ratings. It always was successful.
Did that ever surprise you when you had an idea, you liked it, and all of a sudden everybody else loved
yes.
it?
What surprises me more now about Hogan's Heroes is that today it's a big hit in Germany, which is so strange, but it is.
Well, let's go back one year, 1964. You also helped create or sell and develop Daniel Boone for Fess Parker.
Daniel Boone, Fess Parker was a client of ours, and he was the kind of an actor that we all felt could do. If Daniel Boone could be done, Fess could do it. And it turned out we were right. And it was a simple, sort of nice, straightforward little series, and it worked, and he was perfect.
How did it compare to his Davy Crockett character before? I mean,
well, it compared well. It compared well with it, because it really was sort of the same thing.
Describe him a little bit for me. What was he like?
He was a very earnest actor. He cared tremendously about being prepared, being good at what he did. He worked very hard. He was devoted to what he did, even if it was a simple thing like Daniel Boone, which was no big deal. But he was very responsible.
Right. Well, also in 1964, I'm going to go from television to film here for a second. Your client, James Garner, you helped rework a film for him.
Oh, yes, the Americanization of Emily. When I read the script, I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I had always been a fan of Patty Chayefsky, who wrote it. But I thought it needed work. I certainly recommended it to Garner, depending on the work being done on the script, uh, which had a few problems. But generally, it was a hell of an idea, and Patty was a tremendously talented man. Anyway, Marty Ransohoff was the producer, and John Calley was was Marty's executive assistant. So I went in and I talked to Calley and Ransohoff about the script and what I thought could be done to improve it. And they said something that nobody had ever said to me before, or to an agent before that I ever heard of. They said, would you like to come and be part of developing these ideas in changing the script? In meetings, I mean, big part of it. I said, sure. Well, I was very interested because Garner was our client, and I wanted it to be right for him, right from my point of view. So I began to be like a movie producer. I went to meetings with Callie and Marty and Patty at Metro, and we worked on the script. And they weren't paying me, of course. So at the end of it, Marty said to me, you know, I really think that we owe you something. And why don't you just go out and buy yourself a dress? Go anywhere, buy anything you want. And that'll be my present to you for this. So I went to Magnus. And at that time, there was a very posh designer by the name of Norman Norrell. And I bought a dress. I bought a pretty black dress of Norman Norrell's, and Marty paid for it. And that was my gift from him. At any rate, I also recommended Arthur Hiller to direct it because I had seen stuff that Hiller had done. I had seen work, I don't know what, but I was impressed with him. And I suggested to Marty and John that Hiller directed, and he did a good job. And Julie Andrews, in my opinion, never had a movie in which she was as good as she was in The Americanization of Emily. And I think it was one of Garner's best pictures, too. He was perfect. He was just perfect. And
now, Patty Chayefsky wrote the script. He started in television and was very famous by the time he switched over to films. Tell me a little bit about him.
Well, he was a very unconventional, tough, enormously talented man. He later went on to do a movie called Network, which was also very good. And he was just great, and I loved him. And I got along with him very, very well, even though I had problems with the original script. It was nothing that Patty really resented or argued about. So we were fine.
Now, as you said, this is a good role for Jim Garner. How long have you been representing him at this point? This is 1964.
Oh, well, when I came back to work with Rosie and Bob Coryell, they already represented Garner. They had represented him when he was doing Maverick, and they had been responsible for getting him out of the contract at Warner Brothers because Warner's was treating him very badly. And they went to court, and they hired, as a matter of fact, they hired Martin Gang, a very well-known attorney at that time, to represent him. And Frank Wells, who was working in the Gang office, was the one who pled the case in court for Garner and won. And later, Frank became one of the heads of Warner Brothers and then Disney. And he was killed in a plane crash, but he was he was second to Michael Eisner at Disney all the time that it was becoming. But Frank was Garner's lawyer in that suit. Anyway, Garner had been their client when I arrived, and we became friends because I was very interested in him as an actor and in everything he did. And when I read, it was submitted to us. I forget the name of the guy, very important guy that wrote "Support Your Local Sheriff." He submitted the script to me, and I was crazy about it. And I thought that Jim should do it, and he did it, and it was one of his biggest successes. He was great in it.
What kind of roles was he doing in the early 60s there?
Well, he
mid-60s?
did with John Frankenheimer, he did Grand Prix, and he did the, with McQueen, and Preston Sturgis, Preston, I forget his name. He did The Great Escape. Mm-hmm. He did wonderful movies, but he finally said to me, in the end, he said, "Listen, I only do 1 or 2 movies a year. I want to work more. Maybe I ought to go back into television." So that's how it's.
Yeah, and that's a great story all itself. We'll get to that, but before we go there, 1967, you helped create, or develop rather, a show called Ironside, which is very significant.
Yes, I represented a man called Collier Young, and Collie had the idea to do this show about a detective in a wheelchair, and we got, I can't think of the actor's name. He was
Raymond Burr?
What?
Before Raymond Burr?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Before. Anyway, we got a very important star involved in it, and we developed the script, a pilot script of Ironsides. And I took it to Sid Sheinberg. And the same thing happened to me as happened with Ben Casey and all those others. He said, "In a wheelchair? That's a terrible idea. I wouldn't have anything to do with it." Well, I kept going back to him, and finally I took it to Grant Tinker, who was head of NBC out here, and Grant liked it. Anyway, finally, between Grant and me, we did sell it to Universal. And Melvin Douglas was the actor I had. They didn't want him. They wanted Raymond Burr, which was fine. They got Raymond Burr, and it was a success.
Were you surprised by the public reaction to it?
No. Sid Sheinberg was. Not me. I liked it.
Describe Raymond Burr for me, if you will.
Well, I never knew him very well, but he was good at what he did. He was Perry Mason, and he was Ironsides, and he was very good at it. And he isn't an actor that I'm particularly interested in, but I think he's valuable.
How about Grant Tinker? You mentioned him.
Oh, I like him. Grant's terrific. We used to see each other in New York when he was at Mary Tyler Moore's company, and his company.
MTM, yeah.
And I was in New York. We were both selling television shows. We used to meet in the lobby of the St. Regis where we were staying, and commiserate with each other. It was such a difficult time for both of us. But I like Grant. I think he's terrific and very good at his job.
Great. Now, the producers for that show, for Ironsides, did you hire the producers?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't. I didn't have anything to do with the show. Once it was sold to Universal, I was out of it. You see, it wasn't a Bing Crosby production. I didn't control.
It was Universal Television,
yes,
right?
and it had nothing to do with me. Okay. I just sold it.
Well, then, the significant show that you did help sell and develop was a show, a groundbreaking show that Hal Cantor had written.
Yes.
Tell me about that. That was 1968.
Well, Hal was a client of ours, had been a client of Rosie's from the beginning. And in fact, when Rosie died in 1969, Hal was the one who gave the eulogy at his funeral, and he was very eloquent, and I'm devoted to him. Anyway, Hal wrote a script called Julia, and he gave it to me. And it wasn't until the middle of the script that you found out that this wonderful nurse was black. Now, black people had at that time played very insignificant roles in films and television. They were mostly comics or servants. And this girl, this nurse, was terrific at what she did, was very attractive, was very much a person. Excuse me. It was a very well-written script. And at that time, the head of NBC was Mort Werner. And I gave the script to Mort. Excuse me. And I said to him, be sure to read the whole script. I didn't tell him she was black. But I said, be sure to read the whole thing. And he did, and he loved it. And it was not someone saying to me, oh, this is impossible, we can't do it, she's black. Nothing like that. He loved it. And in the end, and Hal, of course, was very pleased, and he should have been, because he had written a really good script. And in the end, they cast Diane Carroll. I didn't have much to do with that, but I certainly was a little bit involved, and I liked her a lot. I mean, as an actress, I thought she was perfect. She was attractive, and she was authoritative, and she could play this. And in the end, it became a very important show for a woman who was black to be playing a part where she had such authority and such real knowledge and was good at her job and terrific dame.
That's great. Now, the original script, was it called Mama's Man?
I don't remember.
Okay. Because, yeah, I think it was originally Mama's Man, and then I think some of Diane Carroll's associates asked to have
maybe so.
I'm just switching pages here. But did it surprise you that it didn't take you very long to convince the network to take the idea that quickly?
No, Mort was a very, he was somebody you could talk to, and he understood why this could be important. No, I didn't have a difficult time selling it at all.
Tell me a little bit more about Mort Werner.
Mort Werner was fascinating. You never could talk to him on the phone because he was never anywhere but up in the air. He was flying. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He didn't want to have anything to do with working. He was on his way from New York to Los Angeles in a plane, or he was on his way from Los Angeles to New York, and you got mail from a plane on plane stationery from him, notes. It was hard to find him. He was very hard to find. But when I caught him with Julia, it worked.
That's funny. That's funny. So in 1969, your husband retired, and
he had been very ill with emphysema, and he died in '69.
What did you do with the agency at that point?
Well, I didn't want to have the agency all by myself. So I made a deal with Marvin Josephson, who now owns ICM, or is the head of ICM. And at that time, he still had a big agency. And I made a deal and sold our agency to him and went to work there for a year.
What was the name of the agency at that point?
I don't...
IFA?
IFA,
What does
yes.
that stand for?
International Famous Artists. But it was a big agency, and I hated being in a big, I'd always been in a smaller, powerful agency, and this was huge, and I hated it. So I was there for a year, and I left. But I left because Garner, whom I'd taken with me, I took some clients with me to the new agency. Garner said to me about what I told you. He said, let's do a series. So I went to NBC and I said, Garner will do a series. And they said, "Ooh, great." And they gave me a tremendous amount of money, $200,000. And they said, hire some writers to do 3 pilot scripts for Garner, and then we'll decide which one we want to make, which is an unheard of way to do it. But it was great. Meanwhile, I had once read a screenplay called The Skin Game, which had never been made, been bought by Warner Brothers, never been made. And I said to Warner Brothers, because we made the deal with NBC, then we went to Warner's to make the stuff. I said to Warner's, listen, there's a screenplay called The Skin Game. I want to make it as a movie with Garner and some actor, some other actor. And they said, okay. And it's a wonderful script about 2 con men from New Jersey, one black, one white. They go south to little towns. This is early on in the, I guess, in the Civil War days. Anyway, they go south to the little towns, and in every little town, Garner sells the black friend that he's got as a slave, pretend slave. This is his slave, and he's auctioning him off. Then they take the money and run out of town, go to another town. They make a fortune. They go from town to town, and Garner sells a black guy in every town. And meanwhile, they're 2 equally not very legitimate con men. But we didn't have a black actor. I had been to the Mark Taper Forum, and I had seen a play in which a black man played the part of Lumumba, a president of one of the African countries. And his name was Lou Gossett. And I had never seen him before, and I don't know that he had ever done a film. But I said to Warner Brothers and to Garner, I want to test this man, Lou Gossett, because I think he's great, and I think he'd be wonderful for Skin Game. So sure enough, we tested him with Garner in the part, and he was good, and we hired him. And we made the movie, and it was good. Paul Bogart directed it.
Did you produce that, or were you?
Yeah, no, I was executive producer of it, yes. And Peter Stone, who wrote it, and did a great job. When he saw in the paper that Garner was going to do it, he said, oh my God, that's a disaster. It'll be terrible. I don't want my name on it. He went to the Writers Guild and he got them to change. He got them to tell Warner's that that the writer was going to be called. He made up a name. When the movie was finished, it was just wonderful. When the movie was finished, he saw it. I mean, before it was released, and he said, oh, I want my name on it. And I said, too bad. Too bad. Over, you've done it. I'm not going to put your name on it. And I didn't. Anyway, after that, I developed 3 projects with my lots of money. I hired Jim Brooks, who was doing television at that time, had done Room 222. And Frank Pearson, who had just done Cool Hand Luke and Cat Ballou, and is so talented, and Don Mankiewicz. They wrote 3 scripts, pilot scripts for Garner. And the one I liked the best was Jim Brooks's. And so I had lunch with him. And he said, oh, I'm so glad you like it. I'm busy otherwise. I'm going to do the Mary Tyler Moore show, so I won't be involved. And I said, which is an absolute law with me, that if the person that writes the pilot won't work on the show, I don't do the show. So I said, then Jim, I'm not going to do it. I'm simply not going to do it. Frank Pearson was very happy to work on the show, and he had written a very good pilot script called Nichols. So Nichols was what we did. I was executive producer. Frank was the supervising producer, head writer, and Nichols was a Western in which Garner was a reluctant sheriff in 1915, which means he had a motorcycle and there were telephones, and it was a whole different look of a Western. Well, Mort Werner was absolutely crestfallen because Garner wasn't John Wayne. He had a reluctant sheriff who didn't want to get killed and was very sharp and funny. And he wanted John Wayne, somebody who was macho. And he kept coming to me and telling me, couldn't we take some of the humor out and make him more tough? No, I said, this is the show. And it was a wonderful show. But they kept moving it around because they didn't like it. And it failed. We did 1 year. And then Garner and I left Warner's.
Well, before we leave that, did you help cast the rest of the show?
Oh, I was executive producer.
So,
I did everything.
Stuart Margolin?
Oh, that was so great. We were interested in hiring for that role of the deputy sheriff, John Aston. So we got some film that John Aston had done that we could look at. And in the film was a moment, a sliver of a moment of Stuart Margolin. And I said, oh my God, who is that? I never saw him before. And it was Stuart. And we didn't hire John Aston, we hired Stuart, who was the deputy sheriff in Nichols. He was wonderful, just as wonderful as he was Angel in Rockford. And I'll tell you about that later.
Some of the others, Neva Patterson?
Neva, yes, Neva, and what's her name? The kook.
Margot Kidder.
Margot. I called Margot and said, I have this wonderful show, and you'd be great as the girl lead with Garner. Oh, she said, I wouldn't dream of doing television. Couldn't possibly. I said, Margot, nobody knows you. You're very talented. You'll be wonderful. And I finally convinced her, paid her a lot of money and convinced her. And she was good. She was very good.
Alice Ghostley? No.
Well, she was only in it
A little.
once in a while.
I'm going to stop there and we're going to switch tapes.